Hello again, folks. This is Ronnie Turner from the Prophecy Freak YouTube channel. We've got an update for you this time around with some clips from a couple of secular shows. A news clip from Fox News with the expert he has there as a guest, talking about the coming 9.2 mega quake for the Pacific Northwest. And I thought this was really amazing to learn a little bit more about what the experts are expecting. We're all familiar with the 9.0 that happened in Japan, and those of you that aren't familiar with the Richter scale, the way that works, basically an 8.0 is 30 times worse magnitude than a 7.0, and so a 9.0 to a 9.2, the 9.2 would be 6 times the magnitude of a 9.0. So he actually refers to it as, I believe, as a rupture quake, something that's going to give unprecedented damage like we've never seen before. And the experts are saying we're several decades overdue for this particular quake zone, quake region, to have one of this magnitude. And then, of course, in the Bible it talks about there will be earthquakes in diverse places. And even in Revelation it talks about an earthquake so strong that the mountains are thrown into the sea. So it makes me think about that, and perhaps this is going to be a prelude to what that eventual devastating earthquake would look like. So I thought you guys would want to see this, so we'll let you check this out.
Article by Catherine Schulz in the New Yorker this week, and frankly, if I lived right now in the Pacific Northwest, I'd be considering moving. Seriously. The gist of it is this: the federal government estimates 13,000 Americans will die in a major earthquake and tsunami in the Pacific Northwest. It's not a question of whether, but when. This earthquake is coming, and it's overdue. Consider that the magnitude 9.0 earthquake in Japan just a few years ago, remember that, killed more than 15,000 people in the north of Japan and injured thousands of others. Seismologists say that the quake that will strike on our Pacific Northwest coastline should be even stronger, at up to a 9.2. They call such a quake a margin rupture quake, and it's every bit as bad as it sounds. Here's the reason for it. Our entire continent sits on the North American tectonic shelf, right? Plate, I should say. Off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, from the top of Washington State all the way down to Northern California. This is it. And another plate called the Juan de Fuca is trying to slide up under North America, but it's stuck. We have an illustration over here in the big wall. Let me show you what this is. This is our continent here. This is the Cascada Mountains. This is the Cascadia, what do they call it? The Cascadia what? Bridge. The Cascadia Bridge. I was actually asking him, but thank you. The North American plate here and the Juan de Fuca plate here. This one's sliding up under, and eventually this is going to go down, send a huge wall of water up. That wall will go all the way over to Japan, and the other will come onto our shore within 15 minutes. And when it slips, it will unleash not only a colossal earthquake, but also that tsunami, 700 miles long, and in some places up to a 100-foot high wall of water and whatever it's pushing, like houses and dump trucks and schools. Thousands and thousands will not escape. The New Yorker quotes a FEMA official who says, and I quote, "Our operating assumption is that everything west of Interstate 5 will be toast." Everything west of Interstate 5 is gone. That's Seattle, Tacoma, Portland and Olympia, Salem and Eugene, wiped out. Altogether about 7 million people. That's not including tourists. So think of summertime. The New Yorker reports that FEMA calculations indicate the disaster will damage or destroy about 1 million buildings, including 3,000 schools and 1/3 of all fire stations. And perhaps the worst part of all of this, these sorts of earthquakes happen at regular intervals in exactly this part of the world, have forever. On average, according to seismologists, about every 240 years. So when was the last one of these massive 9.2 or so earthquakes? Well, the last one was more than 300 years ago, the year 1700. It struck in the Pacific Northwest and sent a 600-foot wave of water all the way to Japan. So right now, on average, the Pacific Northwest is decades overdue for the really, really big one. Michio Kaku is a physicist and professor at City College of New York. This article is stunning. Is it overstated in any way?
No, the Cascadia Fault is an earthquake waiting to happen. We know it's going to happen with an energy 30 times the maximum energy of the San Andreas Fault. So Hollywood has us brainwashed into thinking the big one is going to be in California. No, the Cascadia Fault would pack energy 30 times the energy that the San Andreas Fault can muster.
The article speaks of a liquefaction of the earth, that part of the earth will turn to liquid.
That's right. We're talking about major energy surges inside the ground that'll cause it to liquefy. We've seen that in Japan. We saw that at Fukushima, and it's almost like quicksand. One day you're walking on solid ground, the next you're falling right into a quicksand.
This earthquake would last 4 minutes or more, the rattling and the shaking, and then within 15 minutes they estimate this wall of water. In the entire inundation zone, you could have water up to 100 feet high.
That's right. And in the inundation zone, we have 70,000 people that have almost no clue as to what could happen. You know, in Japan, you have to live with earthquakes every day. Children go through tests and drills. People are conscious of this. But in the Pacific Northwest, it barely rates on the radar screen.
There's something that happens before the shaking that we can sense, that sensors can pick up. That's an early warning system that they have all over Japan, especially in the north and in the Tokyo area. They've been trying to get it pushed through, look for money for it in the Seattle-Tacoma area, nothing.
That's right. Before the earthquake actually hits, there's a compression wave that is detected by animals, for example. Animals start to act very strange, and we've seen that happen before earthquakes. And then a minute, 2 minutes later, boom, you head for the hills because there's nothing left to do except to go to high ground.
You mentioned what this sort of event has caused in history.
That's right. In the year 1700, there was a massive earthquake and tsunami which surged over Japan. And then running the videotape backwards, you can actually see that in 1700, it originated with a Cascadia Fault. And then we physicists can calculate the energy, the magnitude, the dynamics once we got these two events linked together. And that was only done in the last decade or so.
And you mentioned Mount Everest.
That's right. Mount Everest is also created by the collision of two faults, just like what we have here. The one fault going under, the other fault going over, and that created the Himalayan mountains. That created Mount Everest. That's the power packed by the subduction zone earthquake.
Okay. Averages of when things are going to happen are really not very reliable. I think they used by example, the difference between 4 and 6 is 2. I forget exactly how they did it. We can't be sure exactly when this is going to happen, but we're positive it's going to happen. If you lived in the Pacific Northwest, you had little kids, would you live there?
I'd think twice. I would have to drill them just like what they do in Japan, be part of their life in terms of having an emergency kit, where to go in case of an emergency, what to do, what frequencies to go to, and so on and so forth. And by the way, we know that this is going to happen because by simply drilling into the seafloor, we can see evidence of ancient tsunamis going back 10,000 years. And we've
There have
known
been
that
how many over that period?
41, which means that the time between the cycles is about 240 years.
Wow.
And it's been 315 years since the last big one. Now, of course, this is not rigorous, it's not absolute. But according to this figure, we could be overdue for another big one.
Yeah, by many decades. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Really weird and scary.
That's right. And, you know, within the lifetime of some of our viewers, they may see Seattle and Portland destroyed.
It's a great article at the New Yorker. It's in this month's edition and spectacularly well written. And the facts that go along with it they're really sort of mind-numbing.
The next clip we got is from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory with their update on Ceres. And as the Dawn spacecraft gets closer, it's getting higher detail pictures and more information. They're still not divulging what the bright spots are, but these pictures are pretty interesting, and it makes me think of what the Bible says, how the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and there will be signs in the heavens. And I don't know how many of you keep up with the whole UFO phenomenon, but that's something I've looked more and more into as I've learned about the days of Noah and the fallen angels interacting with humans, and all of the things that have gone on in the Earth's past that we have proof of today with the megalithic structures and a lot of amazing scientific accomplishments that were completed before our time, things including laser cut stones that are placed that we can't even do today, being uncovered and found. It makes you feel like that when Jesus said that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of Son of Man. It makes me think that we're getting closer to that time, because it looks like we're beginning to see some of those same type phenomenon, same type activity. Noah had the days of the giants, and that's why the flood came. We've been warned that as we get closer to the end time, it's going to be that way here as well. And then Revelation gives some pretty descriptive details of what that's going to look like. So he touches on a couple of the bright spots, which one of the biggest things in the UFO phenomenon is the orbs. I don't know if you've heard about that or seen any of the videos, but that's what that reminds me of. And then he also talks about a structure that looks like a pyramid. And as you know, our Earth, we have pyramids all over the Earth from ancient times that can't really be explained how they were built or where they came from or why they were built. So again, that's something else that makes me feel like we're definitely getting closer to that time. So I want you guys to see this, and then I'll keep you posted on any new video clips that come out from NASA.
This is dwarf planet Ceres, a mysterious world of rock and ice. How can you not be mesmerized by those glowing spots? We'll see those again in a moment, along with some other amazing sights on this fascinating alien world, revealed by the Dawn spacecraft now in orbit there. And get your 3D glasses ready. Here we're taking a little tour around a 60-mile diameter crater named Okator, a Roman agricultural deity. It's 2 miles deep, and you can see these intriguing bright regions. They reflect a great deal more sunlight than the rest of the surface material, but scientists haven't yet determined what it is about their composition or structure that's responsible. There are a number of different ideas about what they are, but to discover their real nature, we need to get more data from lower altitudes. Eventually, however, as we learn more about them, they may provide insights into the geology of this complex dwarf planet. This mountain is among the tallest features on Ceres, a cone that juts 4 miles high from an otherwise unremarkable area. It isn't in a crater or even obviously associated with one. So what forces shaped it? And why does it have this varying appearance, dark on one side, and now we're coming around to the other side and we can see these bright streaks running down one side? What does this structure tell us about how this world works? This is another of the captivating mysteries about Ceres. Now put on your 3D glasses and have another look at the first dwarf planet ever discovered. Dawn's going to be getting still better views as it orbits closer and closer and uses its camera and other sophisticated sensors to reveal the secrets Ceres has held since the dawn of the solar system.
All right, and then this last clip we have is kind of titled Transhumanism or Inhuman. And again, this touches on some of the scientific and medical activities going on in the world. Even though we think of the United States as being trying to be cutting edge technology, and I believe we are in the medical world, there are other nations that don't have the morals that we do, even though ours are somewhat decaying. There's other countries that are seeking out genetic engineering and actually carrying out specific procedures that basically engineers the genome for human beings, modifies the DNA to achieve superior attributes for humans, all the way to the preconception level, modifying the DNA and the sperm and the egg, which is, to me, just appalling, I guess, to think that we're taking what God created for His purpose and creating us in His image, and here we're distorting that into who knows what. So I thought this is a really good informational clip to be aware of what's going on in the world, and as we move on down the road, it's really hard to tell exactly where we're going to go with it. So again, this is something else that kind of ties us back to the, possibly the days of Noah when the fallen angels tried to manipulate human beings to create their own demigods, mini-gods, which many teach that, the flood destroyed those, but the spirits that remain became the demons that we have to deal with today. So it's just another sign of possible demonic activity in the world. So I wanted you guys to see this as well and be aware of it, and we'll see what you think about it.
Synthetic biology is predicted to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry, but will it fundamentally change human life? This is Skywatch TV News. I'm Derek Gilbert, and welcome to Sci Friday. This is something we're doing on Fridays now as we look at some of the most important science stories of the week and how they impact us as Christians. And in studio today for Sci Friday, we have Sharon Gilbert, my favorite person in the world, and Tom Horn. Tom, you've been working for some time now on the movie Inhuman, a look at the transhumanist movement, and there have been some very interesting and potentially disturbing developments into the research behind the transhumanist movement, specifically genetics. What are you watching, and why do you think they're important?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting, we started this Inhuman documentary just a few years ago. The idea was we're going to get all points of view, and we're going to interview those who are the leaders in the transhumanist community. Why do you think that transhumanism is going to happen, and why is this a good idea from your point of view? And then we're going to go to the other side. We've got members of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics. So we got the brainiacs from Stanford University and places like that to sit down, tell us what they think is both ethical or unethical about the potential of the science. Do people really believe this is even going to happen? Besides all the utopian talk coming out of the transhumanist camp, is it real? And then, of course, we went and got all of the theologically minded experts. Sharon's in the documentary, Gary Stearman's in the documentary, Noah Hutchings, the last documentary, of course, for him since he passed away, Chuck Misler. And we wanted to know then from a biblical point of view, are we talking here about a return to the days of Noah? It's a big question. Now, what I was going to say, though, is that from the time we started this work, and people should know that the documentary is in its final stages now. We're hoping that it's going to be available probably by September, sometime around then. And it's in editing right now with our friend Gon Shamora, so he's working on that, doing a fabulous job. But from the time we started until now, the technology has been so exponential that we find here at the end we're actually having to take some of the new technology and incorporate it into the film so the film wouldn't be outdated simply by the time that it was put together. And of course, the number one story out there has to do with CRISPR technology. The reason why we have people like Sharon in the world is to explain to us what this even means. I mean, I understand it's some kind of quick editing tool for making accurate genetic modification.
It's based on something that was discovered about 15 years ago in bacteria. It was a way to help repair mistakes that were inserted into the bacterial DNA by bacteriophages. In other words, viruses that invade bacteria. About 2005 or so, there was discovered a way that can take that same method and use it in humans to edit DNA within humans. It's really pretty simple, not super simple so that you and I could actually run out and do it. But basically they take a short guided RNA which matches the section that you want to edit. So if your edit is, say, 2,000 base pairs long, you find something that's the mirror image of that, which will actually go in and match up to it. Then there's an enzyme, which is called Cas9, and that goes in and it snips both of the strands of the double-stranded DNA molecule. And this only happens, traditionally, in one of the chromosomes. For each gene trait or section, set of genes that maybe do eye color or hair color or how strong you are, those appear on a chromosome from your mom and a chromosome from your dad. Both chromosomes generally are not edited until now. Just this week, I saw an article that said that there is a brand new method in what's called gene drive technology, where the CRISPR-Cas9 method of editing is used to go in and edit both chromosomes.
And why is that important?
That's important because they're doing it in the eggs and the sperm so that they can have all progeny inherit that edited gene. In other words, they want to make sure that trait is always inherited. It's being used in South America and in Africa right now in mosquitoes in order to reduce entire populations of Egypt and Anopheles mosquitoes because of the fear of malaria. But the problem is when you remove an entire species from an ecosystem, you have entirely rewritten that ecosystem, and we don't know what
the things that would feed on those pests suddenly now have to find a different food source.
And that assumes that the technology edited the correct gene and did it in the correct manner. In other words, that it hasn't ruined the gene entirely or gone to a different gene.
Now, what is the percentage? I mean, how accurate is this technique? Do they get it right every single time they try to edit something, or how many mistakes do they create before they finally hit on the one that the result they wanted?
That's a really good question, because there are a lot of stories out there right now that make it sound like CRISPR-Cas9 technology is always going to work, that it always hits the correct gene and does the correct change. The problem is the research that I have read, the actual research publications, state that it may be as much as 40% error rate.
Wow. 40% unintended genetic mutations.
Going into the wrong gene.
Yeah, which is interesting because I just read this article. In fact, I brought this paper. It was for the BBC, and there's a scientist telling them that the CRISPR technology is almost at 100% accuracy now. His actual line is, you shoot, you score. You're going to get it right every time.
Well,
so that's what we're being told. And here's the thing that's interesting about this is because this is an article talking about how CRISPR technology is going to be used not to modify mosquitoes, but to modify humanity.
Yes.
In fact, that's the headline. Genetically modified humans debate must start now, say scientists. Another article I brought, last scientist in Congress has human genetic engineering warning. He sounds more like you. This is Representative Bill Foster. This was featured at The Hill, which is the #1 website that congressmen and lawmakers go to and read. And he says what makes this important is we're talking about genetic modification to germline cells, just what you said, sperm, eggs, embryos. These modifications be carried forward to future generations and would fundamentally change the course of human evolution. But listen, he says this. He says the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine have already announced that they are starting a major international initiative to develop guidelines for human genetic modification. So just like we've been saying, just like the documentary Inhuman, the argument we make in that case, the science is being perfected, and they definitely do intend to use it. Now, why would they? Well, part of this is being driven by the military. Our military has been advised several times in the last few years, especially like by the Jasons. Who are the Jasons? Nobody really knows, except that they're like the premier science body that gives, information, policy information to the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and they're saying you have to get ahead of this technology because our potential enemies already are developing it, and you can't risk falling behind. Otherwise, it would dominate us on the battlefield, or they'll dominate us in the marketplace. Because back again to the utopian ideas of the transhumanists, they think this is going to be so cool, so great. We're going to become super X-men and X-women. Everybody's going to want this, so it's going to be driven by the marketplace.
Now,
I just want to jump in and say the marketplace is driving it because there's a lot of money to be made on this.
Exactly. Now, this is a topic, obviously, that we can't cover really well in a 10-minute segment. That's why there's a whole movie that we're doing to talk about this. But there are people who would see this and say, yeah, I understand the dangers, the potential dangers, but this is really the realm of science. Why are we as Christians worried about this? When we look at the geopolitical situation around the world, we look at the threat of Iran to Israel, we look at the ancient Christian communities in Iraq, the Assyrian Christian communities who can trace their roots back to the late first, early second century, Christians in Syria, Christians in Egypt, that are being eliminated by the Muslim Brotherhood, by ISIS, ISIL, the Islamic State, whatever you want to call them. Why does this topic matter to us as Christians?
Well, of course, we should be talking about what's happening with the Islamic State and its persecution of Christians worldwide. We're going to have Colonel Bob McGinnis, going to be in this studio before long talking about what's happening with ISIS and how our Pentagon is failing to recognize the ancient apocalyptic ideas that are driving that threat.
Sure.
So we certainly should pay attention to that. But we also should pay attention to this. Look, for generations, Christians were the ones. We built the hospitals. We led the science community, right? And much of that an exploration of trying to understand creation. If it was made by God, by understanding it, we get closer to God. We also become ministers of healing. But there is something that is devilish about the transhumanist idea. It reminds us of the days of Noah. Those Christians in the Mideast that are persecuted and killed go to be with the Lord. They're in the loving arms of God now. But we're talking about creating people who may not even be redeemable. That's why the church ought to be thinking and talking about this subject matter and weighing in. I mean, you know, the ancient story of the Watchers and their creation of the Nephilim. The Watchers go to God and beg for the redemption of their creation, and God says they cannot be redeemed. They're now in the underworld. They're called the Raphaim, and it says they won't take part in the resurrection. They cannot be saved. So it raises these really deep questions, right? If you genetically modify humans, to what extent do they cease being a human? And in that sense, to what extent are they no longer made in the image of God? Do they have a redeemable soul? Can they be saved? These are perilous and deep ethical questions that the church ought to be at the forefront of talking about right now, because we really are entering into the hybrid age.
Yeah, and transhumanism, I so agree with you. Transhumanism will eventually so change us if we keep on this track that it is doubtful that we would still be human. But along with that is this notion of artificial intelligence and using robotic or artificial constructs to upload a human consciousness. This is also part of the transhumanist dream. And I can tell you, if you build a golem and try to upload a human spirit into it, that's not going to work, and that is not going to be human.
Right, and then of course the question, why? This is called the divine order. Why did God make everything the way he did and then command that each kind only reproduce after its own kind? He put barriers between the species, and now we're knocking down the barriers. We're transgenically altering humans, at least at the embryonic level. We're doing it right now. This whole thing with Planned Parenthood that's been in the news, and now we learn that some of these baby parts that have been sold are being used to actually create humanized mice. What other kind of Frankensteinian stuff is happening, you know? So that over time, it's the process of gradualism, drip, drip, drip. We finally get used to abortion. We finally get used to it. The church doesn't really think about it anymore, doesn't talk about it anymore, the fact that so many babies have died in their mother's womb. How long will it take before the idea that we sell baby parts so that they can create a humanized monkey or something out of it is also, you know, it's blasé, we don't care about it anymore.
Yes.
This is what's driving the documentary Inhuman. Nothing like this documentary has ever been made before. Ray Kurzweil made a film from his point of view as a transhumanist. There have been a few little films out there, but nobody until now has put all of these various points of view together. And are doing it in such a way that we're respectful of their point of view, but we're also not going to cower when it comes to our point of view. And we think we have some very important things to say about it.
Absolutely. It's redefining, potentially, what it means to be human entirely. Inhuman, the movie, should be available by September. Tom Horn, Sharon Gilbert, both featured in the film. And this is the kind of thing that we do on Sci Friday here at SkyWatch TV. And the reason that we keep such a close eye on scientific developments, we in the church have been so indoctrinated into the positivistic worldview, the idea that science has all the answers, that here in the West, we have demythologized, desupernaturalized our faith to the point that we assume that science has the answers. In other words, we live a supernatural life on Sunday, and then in the natural world, Monday through Saturday night.